Hello, everyone. My name is Paolo Mangiola, and I'm the Artistic Director of ța, the national dance company of Malta. And this is Dance Is Us. It's a series of podcasts produced by the company during the COVID-19 crisis. The program aims to highlight the many ways dance features in our lives, reminding us that everyone has a relationship with movement and everyone has an experience of dance. It is also an opportunity for us to draw on the opinions, ideas, and perspectives of the many voices in our cultural ecology. We are talking to dancers, choreographers, as well as artists working in other disciplines, policymakers, curators, writers, directors, and thinkers. This week, the theme is leadership. And from our current situation, we thought we'd ask our peers what it means for them as we contemplate not only the future, but also how we got here. I will now briefly introduce our speakers, and then we'll kick off with our questions. Joanne is the head of programming and production at the Valletta Cultural Agency. Joanne has been working in the fields of arts, culture, and cultural heritage since 2003, focusing on site curation, digital humanities, arts management, and EU funding. After coordinating the implementation of the cultural program for Valletta 2018, she's now leading the team working on the cultural program for the Valletta Cultural Agency. Caldon, manager of the Valletta Design Cluster, has been coordinating the work of the group since its earliest stages. He has worked on the national cultural policy in 2011 and on the national strategy for the cultural and creative industries in 2013. Also on the European Capital of Culture in Valletta, as well as on the development and implementation of several public funding initiatives related to culture and art. So we start with the podcast always with beginning with the same question. And this is for both of you. And the question is, what is your earliest or most vivid memory of dance? Joanne or Caldon, who wants to start?
Go ahead, Joanne.
Okay. Mela, my earliest memory of dance was as a little girl asking my mom to take me to ballet classes. Because I was obviously, just like most other kids, fascinated by the graceful dancers and their enormous tutus. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And it took another 20 years before I actually started dancing, because it always felt like something that I wanted to do. And that was the start of a whole new chapter in my life, which took 15 years. So dance has been a very important part of my life for quite some time now.
Thank you. And Caldon, what is your first earliest memory of dance?
Well, I think I will choose what is the most vivid rather than the first.
Okay.
Because I didn't have direct experience of going to dance classes myself. But I think when I was really, what impressed me most was a performance, or a couple of performances I had seen in Edinburgh during one of the festivals there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think I was more into theater before that, but then when I saw, actually it was dance theater, so there was a lot of narrative embedded in the let's say in the movement, and that was quite powerful. It was the Netherlands dance theater,
yes,
which was running a number of performances, and the way they used the space. Not just the performance spaces in the conventional one on the stage, but also they used the embedded technology, but also the play with gender roles, as one would expect the dancers to perform.
Yes.
It kind of really opened up the possibilities of experiencing that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, talking about festivals and activities, Joanne, can you help us just describing what was the transition from the Valletta 2018 Foundation into the Valletta Cultural Agencies, and how are you leading your team into this new phase?
Well, it was quite a change, perhaps a more drastic change than most people perceive. The Valletta 2018 was more than just a program. It was a national initiative. It was a moment for the city and the national culture to shine at European level. And what most people maybe don't realize or tend to forget sometimes is that Valletta 2018 was working at national level. So we were implementing a cultural, we created and we implemented a cultural program that was meant to address the whole country, both Malta and Gozo, whilst ensuring that there was a very, very strong international element. The Valletta Cultural Agency was created as part of the legacy of this initiative, a very important in terms of legacy, because it means that the momentum that was created was never intended to stop or to be lost. But that came with a very, very big difference. And in a way, it changed completely the way we can think of this cultural program. And the big difference is that now we focus only on Valletta.
No, okay.
So if you look at the legal notice that establishes the Valletta Cultural Agency, in which it encourages, it actually states what we need to do as an agency, and that we need to value culture in all its forms, both traditional and contemporary, wherein we have to set and adhere to quality standards, but all of that within the geographic confines of our capital city. We work very closely with the communities, we always have, but now we have to focus even more on the 5,000 residents that live in our capital city, a small but very culturally rich fraction of our population.
Yeah, in fact, for the listeners, if you come to Malta, of course, you should come and visit Valletta, because it's indeed has flourished through the Valletta 2018, and then indeed through all the activities of the Valletta Cultural Agencies. Yes, thank you. And Caldon, can you tell us a little bit more about the design cluster? Because was this project was born within the Valletta 2018 Foundation and then developed into something different? Can you just guide us through this, please?
Yes, I mean, the project was a result of identification of a gap that exists in providing support for people working in the culture and creative sector, especially people who are starting out in the sector. These could be students who are graduating, or even before they graduate, while they are still kind of moving into the sector, and also people who have been working for a number of years. They're quite, experienced, but they want now to move out into the open, let's say, as freelancers or as kind of starting their own area. And there was a big investment happening from the public side into education, especially, and into also support for startups and people working into even the voluntary sector. But this was mainly supported through education, of course, new courses at university, new courses at MCAST, and also startup support from Malta Enterprise and other agencies. But in terms of space, physical space, where people can come together and share experiences, learn from each other, maybe kind of network in an organic way, so people kind of bump into each other, not in a programmed way, but more in a kind of a meetup kind of environment where people can learn about what they are doing and then discover possibilities for collaboration. That type of space was missing. So the cluster originated as an address to that gap. Then, of course, the space was identified in Valletta, and that brought a whole new dimension of the project as an urban regeneration project. So that had to be brought down, not as a kind of an afterthought, but down to the foundations of the project. So we had to rethink the project as partly addressing this gap that I mentioned, but also, and there is a huge gap there as well, in addressing urban regeneration from a community perspective, rather than from a kind of a top-down, let's go in and restore a space that has been neglected. But let's look at what the community needs. Let's look at what the urban environment requires from a public space, from a social space, from a kind of a neighborhood perspective, and weave those issues into the fabric of the project itself.
And do you operate as well only in Valletta or throughout Malta?
Well, I would say that we operate within an international environment, first of all. On a very kind of practical level, because the project is being financed from European funds, apart from Maltese government funds, but also because a lot of what we are doing is definitely not new. It is well established internationally when you create, creative spaces and kind of spaces for encounter between different people, but also because the lifeline is being open to the world and being open to different communities. So, as I mentioned, the urban regeneration dimension is absolutely rooted, not in Valletta in general, but in the specific neighborhood where we are within Valletta. But then let's say the branches and the opening up of the whole project, and it reaches out beyond the confines of the geographical space.
Thank you, Caldon. Thank you very much. So now we're going to go deep into our which is leadership. And both of you are covering two important roles within the organizations that you work with. So the very first question would be, how do you define the leadership? And what are the values that are important to you in order to create that type of leadership that you are longing for?
What do I think is one of the most important values of leadership for me? It sounds cliche, but it is teamwork. Teamwork comes at many different levels. So from the micro scale, starting with working with my own team. For me, the leader makes the team as much as the team makes the leader. And it is up to whoever is leading to make the most of the skills and the knowledge of the people that they are working with. And I am blessed to work with a wonderful team of people. But the same can be applied at national level. Who's the team in this case? The team are the rest of the public cultural organizations, the arts councils, the private enterprise or the NGO who is leading a new aspect, a new creative aspect in this field. And the collaboration, if we do manage to get all of these different elements, all of these different entities to work together, enhancing the strength of each one, I think we will have a much better results, a much better chance to lead the country into a new or an improved era in the field of culture and the arts.
That's a beautiful description of how leadership can be applied on a macro level. Thanks. And Caldon.
Yeah, I mean, I start just by reacting to what Joanne has just mentioned. I don't think the teamwork definition of leadership is a cliche. I think it's very, very, very relevant, and I wish it's taken up kind of more seriously, broadly speaking, in the spirit that Joanne has described it, because that is really, I think it's really important. But then maybe on a more personal level, I think leadership is very much a struggle. It really defines the way one struggles with with the difficulties and with the resistances that one finds first and foremost within oneself, because it's very much a kind of a balancing act between different dynamics, and it's about how one approaches certain difficulties and certain decisions that need to be made. And that's, of course, where one realizes that one is not alone and one has to kind of discuss and come up with, but the struggle, I think, defines this, and appreciating that there are difficulties and resistances, and very often it's internal resistances, as in within oneself. So how is one going to balance between one's own personal biases and the objective reality that one is facing? How one resists reacting immediately as against taking a longer perspective and then making the right decision? How does one include the perspectives of different people, but then taking the responsibility of one decision, yourself? How does one balance between a system within which one works, which is very bureaucratic, but which enables what we can do and which provides us with resources? And how does one bring a very strong human dimension outside of the bureaucracy within that, and balance? These I find to be that's the difficulty of your question, because it's not really about it. Well, I'm not answering you, as in I'm not giving a definition, but I'm just saying how, the difficulties,
yes,
the resistances. But of course, the resistances is what creates. It's like an electric bulb, without resistance, there is no light. So you have to struggle with these resistances to create something. So it's a creative process as well.
It is indeed, and using the analogy of light, you shed light into the many layers that leadership has, and this is something that, again, with the position that you both have in the organization, you've got to deal not only with bureaucracy, as you mentioned, also with the people that work in your team.
Yes.
To go back,
Yes.
Because I'm very, very curious. Is there any experience that you would like to share with us? It can be a very simple event that happened yesterday, or something that really kind of open up like a Pandora box, and you were like, "Oh, I've learned something now in this experience, and this is what I want to share."
If I can actually mention two, one on a very small scale, and one which is massive. I had, let me say, a reality check when I took over the implementation of the Valletta 2018 program back in July 2017. That was like being shot from a cannon into a tub of hot oil and trying to come out of the other side alive. But that experience has taught me a lot about leadership, about listening, and about problem solving, which is what Caldon mentioned. I think actually that's possibly one of the definitions of leadership, the problem solver. On a much smaller scale, sometimes one thing that I learned is that sometimes you need to let go of your own mindset. You need to let go of yourself. Sometimes your own idea is not the best one. Sometimes you need to just be open-minded enough, willing enough to just give up and let go and take on someone else's idea. It happens sometimes. This has a very practical example, but it happens at the office when together we meet up in our programming meeting, and we come up with an idea, and then I ask each person present to come up with their own version of it, so that we can combine all of this into one big pot, and then we bring in artists, and the whole thing could change completely when we bring in artists, we bring in creatives to give their feedback. And but it's very important that you need to be able to just move away from yourself, your own idea. I think that's one of the key lessons that I have learned.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one experience that comes to mind was a project that we had a year and a half ago at the end of 2018. It was an urban intervention that we were carrying out with a community outside of Valletta in this case, and it was a marathon. It was like a 72 hours project. So there was a group of people who was working around the clock, and because it was a non-stop, there were 2 shifts, and people kind of carried forward from one group to the next during the day and during the night. And there was a point where some decisions had been made, and the consequences of those decisions would have put us in a very difficult situation. But I was not directly involved in the decision making and in the kind of micromanagement of how this was going on. But of course, I was still responsible. And I realized this, it was around 1:30 in the morning. So I had to make very quickly a decision to bring this team together. It was the night shift that was implementing what the other team had decided, and to basically reverse and redefine the action. And it was a major decision to be taken together, because I was not the designer in this kind of whole project, so it had to be a shared responsibility. But that was quite difficult for me, because it's very much different from how I tend to kind of approach situations. Like, usually there's a lot of kind of deliberation and discussion, and then everyone is more or less happy, or at least can live with that. But this had to kind of override. So yeah, that was it was a big learning experience for me.
Nice. And I think, again, this is very much in line with Joanne's reflection, with the ability to recognize that sometimes our own ideas, they might not be the best ideas. Yeah. And when the decision-making process happens, definitely it's vital to listen to the many other voices and implementing those voices. And as you mentioned, to have the ability to adapt quickly, which brings me to the next question about this incredible crisis we are going through. And we weren't prepared for it. Now, leadership in these times might look very different. So the question is, how are you both dealing with this change? And I know it's a big question, but as you're thinking, and in the specific, the programming and the organizational structure of both your entities, how has this been adapted with the COVID-19 crisis?
It is a hard process, which I think is made even harder by the fact that we as programmers rely on others, the artists, the academics, the community, who are also going through their own process in the meantime. So we program events. So the first big change was that we program events, projects. Ultimately, for the vast majority of cases, we create instances for people to come together, whether it is to create and see an exhibition, to experience a performance, to experience a workshop. So having to rethink that very basic tenet of the programming was quite a shock for us. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure that what had already been created by so many incredibly talented people that we have been working with and which we had planned to work with for the rest of this year, were still safe, that they could still somehow happen. In fact, one of the things I'd like to mention is that we made sure to keep practically everything. And one of the first steps that we took was to consider how to, we had to give up on a lot of ideas that we already had for 2021, in order to make sure that what we had created for 2020 with all of these amazing people could be saved and could be moved. At the same time, however, I mean, it is a reality that we will never really go back to normality, or at least we will come out of this whole situation with what we're calling a new normal. So what will that mean for programmers and for the artists and for the audience? We have a lot of theories of what will happen once this crisis is over, and once we're told, okay, you can start organizing events that will bring 100 people together, 200 people, 500 people. So we don't know what's going to happen once we get some of these restrictions are lifted. We don't know if the audience or participants, because we really like to make sure that our projects have a very active element, so they're not just audiences but they're participants, whether they will feel safe enough to be part of something or to attend an event. Will the artists feel safe enough to go meet with people, to go interview people? Should we just take the decision and go on a completely different route and do what most people are doing right now because of the quarantine, which is go digital? But at the same time, what are we giving up if we're going digital? We're giving up a very important element of our social of ourselves, which is our interaction with other people. So it's I think it's early to say what leadership or even the cultural field in general will be like at the end of this. What we can do is to start slowly, to experiment, and to learn from each experiment as much as we can.
Which is leadership in itself as well, isn't it?
Yes, hopefully a leadership which will help us understand a little better the new world as soon as it restarts.
How we can navigate this really complex new normal. And I think also because we are in this limbo that we are waiting, first of all, for science to give us an answer with this vaccine. And then that's why we are also waiting. And this waiting creates a lot of expectations as well as uncertainty. And but
and it has been a shock realizing just how vulnerable everyone is.
Indeed. And Caldon, how are you dealing with this?
I'm not sure I'm managing to deal with this. Or rather, maybe we're managing, but I don't feel that we are on a kind of a leadership kind of position with regards to this. First of all, I think we were thrown into this without any sense of preparation for this situation. So probably most of us are still kind of trying to absorb this new reality, let alone the new normal that we're saying about coming out of this. So there's always this kind of lag between the reality that we're living and realizing what it means. But I think there are some things that we can already start. Not that is something new, actually. Maybe we knew them before, just that now we are facing reality without any excuse. And there are different layers, of course, to this. So starting from, let's say, the administration side in the cultural sector, I think we had, and we knew about this as well before, a lot of inefficiencies that had been carried forward from a previous age. Yeah, we still work in administration as if we're in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, where people have to work from an office from that time to this time, consuming government resources such as desks, electricity, air conditioning, everything, as if nothing has happened in the last 200 years, from environmental considerations to efficiencies in technology, to efficiencies in, give me a task and let me do it. If I'm doing it on the beach, or if I'm doing it at midnight, the quality is the question, not where and who is monitoring and the monitoring is in the quality. But so that is one level. This is more about administration, and it's not about culture, it's about everything actually, wherever there's administration. But then the big questions are, should we receive the new normal passively just as we received now this new normal that we're in now, or should we shape it? Or do we have any say in shaping it? And I think this is where questions, for example, of sustainability vis-a-vis the freelancers or the independent cultural sector. Because even if you look, for example, at the way the arts fund or arts funding was, or even an enterprise funding, you give funding with a view to a business plan that should put you in a self-sustaining position within 3 years. This is a model that we've been using in business, or rather, we've absorbed into culture, or we've been forced to absorb into culture, because there's only one model, and it's one model that has control over all administration, business, all sectors. The kind of entrepreneurial approach. Should we accept this also after we move into this? We're seeing things where government is moving in and paying salaries of people, which would have been unthinkable up till a few months ago. So there are these big questions, which we are, I think, still at the very, very early stages, which of asking, even not of answering, but of asking, which I hope we kind of find opportunities to discuss, to dare discussing them. Otherwise, it will be just a question of like, okay, we've passed through this disturbance, let's recalibrate, but recalibrate against an old model. And this whole thing will become it will be a wasted opportunity. And I'm sure there is a lot of vested interest in bringing everything back to normal, just back to the brutal, but one can also say, thank God this is happening. But this will be useful if we take the opportunity to make the changes that there was a lot of resistance to make before. If we just reactivate the resistances, then we go back to normal, in inverted commas.
Yes. And the big question, of course, is how each of us, through our roles in the organizations, how are we going to make this happen? And again, it comes down to concretely to decisions. What kind of decisions on the micro level we're going to take? What kind of artists we're going to work with? What kind of voices? So, which leads me to the next question. We touched a little bit, and which is, what are the greatest challenges now as a sector? And I think we already clearly identified that the business model that we were using is not fit for what has happened now. So out of this, can you just give us even an example, like of what would be a new model that could work? Caldon, you kind of said it a little bit when you said, like, we maybe don't need to use resources and sitting in the office for 8 hours. Maybe I can do my task, and it's about the quality. Can we dig a little bit more into that?
I mean, I don't know. I don't have an answer, of course, in terms of like what the new, what would be a viable new model. And maybe we don't need a model, but we need models that are really personalized. Let's say on the human scale rather than on the system scale. But I'm thinking of the people who have absolutely no income at the moment. And because those are the people who really have a strong interest in making changes. I think the thing that Joanne mentioned in terms of the human contact, that is people working in performing arts, for example, but even in visual arts or in other areas where you need people to experience the real thing, to be present. I don't know, but I don't think we can actually, as humans now, not as cultural practitioners, I don't think we can actually do without that. You know, maybe we can suspend human contact for some time. We do it already, usually for shorter periods of time, not for 3 months or for 6 months.
Yeah.
But it's fine. We can live with that. But I don't think, for example, most people working in the arts today would have gone into the arts if they knew that all they could do is digitally connect to others. They would not have been interested, probably. You know? So it's true that a lot of action can shift to online platforms, but we need to maybe redefine what is non-online platform, the analog. That is what needs to be redefined.
Yes.
How can we reconnect on a human level in this new scenario, of course, you know, which generates value, but which, as you mentioned, you know, is not value that is profit-oriented, but value which is more, okay, first of all, it generates value for artists to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
Okay? But secondly, it generates social value that creates a society that can think about what is really meaningful.
Yeah.
You know? So it's not really an answer, but it's maybe just an expansion on the reflection, you know.
Yeah.
If I could add something to what Caldon just said, I think there's it's not a black or white situation. It's not digital or analog.
Mm-hmm.
There are many ways that we can explore where the two can help each other, can enhance each other. And maybe that is one of the directions that we need to explore more, so that nothing is completely analog and nothing is completely digital, but it has this very organic mix of both, so that if one of them fails, whether it's a complete power outage, so we rely only on the analog, or whether it's, God forbid, another quarantine period and we're stuck inside and we're completely digital, nothing completely dies off. So you're not left stranded. And one other thing is that one thing that I don't think has changed is that we need to work even harder to allow people, or to help people across the spectrum, to realize that culture is not entertainment, that culture is not a weekend outing, that culture is part of our everyday life, and it needs to be valued, and it needs to be used and developed always. And because I think that is the only way to get private funding, for instance, to start getting the private sector to invest in the cultural scene more than it is now, not just as a tax incentive, but as part of their very being, part of their very strategy. Unless we do that, we will always, this whole field will always be very vulnerable. Here in Malta, also because of the size, because of the population, it does rely far too much on public funds and on the government. And part of this is because let's call them the general public, anyone who's not involved, who's perhaps more into the business world, does not realize the value that this brings to their very life. This has always been the case. I just think that the current situation has made it even more difficult as people go back almost into survival mode. What are my priorities? My priorities are to ensure shelter, to ensure food. And the health of my family. But culture plays a very important role in all of this, especially in health, in mental health, in social community, in the health of the community itself.
Yeah, and we have a civic role as organizations there. And I think, again, one of the reasons why, for instance, this campaign that we did as ÄĆfinMalta started, it was exactly that, because we wanted to launch a message out there, starting with a very kind of funny statement that dance is part of our lives, but the underlying message was exactly that, what you mentioned, that culture is an essential aspect of our lives. and good culture help us navigate the complexity of a society which is now going through a very difficult time. So we need more of that, live or online, but good culture. I'd like to go to just steer the conversation back to give us even one tip for anyone that is listening at the moment that would like to improve their leadership skills, and something that is dear to you, or something that you always say to someone starting a new job, or someone.
I have a very simple one. Before taking a decision or before sending a reply, always wait 30 seconds. If you're angry, wait an hour.
That's
because not being impulsive, being able to think about the consequences, the many repercussions of what that decision is or what that reply is, will make a huge difference in your relations with the people you work with, in the final solution on whether you're going to be successful or not.
Thank you. That's a beautiful tip, which I will use it myself. Sometimes I forget about that. Caldon?
Yeah, well, I'm going to use this question as an excuse to recommend that text that people can read whenever they wish. And it's related to dance. So, because it's, it just brought this back to mind when you contacted me to have this discussion. And it's a text by Paul Valéry, and it's called Dance and the Soul. I think it was written around 100 years ago. But there's a lot about leadership there. It's a kind of a Socratic dialogue. And I think it's interesting because it makes you think of dance and dance movement, actually about movement, not about dance, but movement in general, as a flow of energy. And I think there is a lot about, managing the flow of energy in leadership. Just as, anyone coming from martial arts would tell you the same thing. And anyone coming from the performing arts, especially dance, would also tell you probably this thing. But this text, I find, not being a dancer myself, I rely on the text, as I think it's interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to both. And we are at the conclusion of this podcast. It has been a very rich conversation. And for the listeners, you can go online and check both the websites of the Valletta Cultural Agency, as well as the Valletta Design Cluster, and check the book, which was proposed by Caldon. And I just want to say thank you so much for contributing to this. And we also look forward to a new normal. And we do hope that all of this and all these podcasts, they might also help people going through this very difficult time. Is there something you would like to add to conclude?
Nothing comes to mind except stay home, stay safe, follow the regulations, but still keep active within the field. Watch what all of these artists and organizations are sharing with you. Read. Be part of this world. Don't let yourself get locked into a room.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just like to thank you for the opportunity and to congratulate ÄÄFinMalta for the initiative.
Thank you.
It's an exemplary way of actually dealing with the situation in a kind of an open and participative way. So yeah, thanks.
That's a fantastic way to conclude. Thank you so much, both, and we look forward to see you soon out there. Thanks a lot.